A woman accepts a dirty job to ruin a blind date, but an unexpected look turns that lie into the beginning of something that could change all destinies. The ambient music of the Valor Bistro muffled the sound of elegant conversations filling the main dining room. Clara Bennett balanced 3 red wine glasses on a silver tray as she navigated the tables with the precision of someone who knew every inch of that polished wooden floor. Her white apron was spotless, her brown hair pulled back in a low bun, and a professional smile plastered on her face like a well-rehearsed mask. It was Thursday, the restaurant was packed, and she still had 4 hours to go before taking the Underground back to the East End. No one there knew she had woken up at 5 in the morning to take her mother to the hospital before her shift. No one knew that the money from that night would barely cover the next week's medicine. Clara had become an expert at carrying the weight of the world without letting anyone notice. It was a necessary skill for someone balancing 3 jobs and a mother dependent on constant care. She delivered the glasses to table 12 and nodded to the chef through the small kitchen window, 2 more orders ready. She took a deep breath and felt the warm, perfumed air of the restaurant weigh down her lungs. She needed a break, even if it was just 5 minutes. Discreetly, she crossed the narrow corridor leading to the back and pushed open the service door. The cold London night air greeted her like an unexpected embrace. Clara leaned against the brick wall and closed her eyes for an instant. The back street was quiet, lit only by a yellowish street lamp and the distant glow of buildings on Oxford Street. It was then that she heard approaching footsteps. A man in a dark suit emerged from the shadows. He was about 40, with greying hair at his temples, and carried a leather briefcase under his arm. Clara instinctively moved away from the wall, but he raised his hand in a placating gesture. "I need a quick favor," he said without preamble. His voice was firm but not threatening. "I don't have much time, and you're the right person." Clara frowned. "Excuse me, but I think you're mistaken." "I'm not." The man opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick envelope. "Inside this restaurant, in 15 minutes, a blind date is going to happen. Table 17, by the window. The man's name is Edward Vance. I need you to interrupt that date." Clara looked at the envelope, then at the stranger's face. "Interrupt how?" "By pretending to be someone from his past. An ex, perhaps. Nothing violent, just enough to cause embarrassment and destabilize the date." He opened the envelope and showed her the £100 notes. 15,000. Half now, half after you leave the restaurant. Clara's heart raced. £15,000. It was more than she earned in 2 months of work. It was the payment for the private clinic where her mother was waiting for a spot. It was a chance to breathe, even if only for a few weeks. "Why me?" Her voice came out weaker than she intended. "Because you work here, you know the environment, and no one will suspect. Besides," he pointed to her face, "you have the right look for the role." Clara felt a shiver run down her spine. This was wrong. Everything about it screamed danger. But at the same time, the image of her mother lying in a public hospital bed, waiting for a surgery that might never come, echoed in her mind like an insistent drum. "Who are you? Why do you want to sabotage his date?" The man closed the envelope and extended it towards her. "That doesn't matter. What matters is that you have a choice. Accept or not, but decide quickly, because in 12 minutes he'll be sitting at that table." Clara looked at the envelope. Her hands trembled. She thought of her mother, the medicine, the clinic, the bills piling up like a silent avalanche. She thought of how many times she had humbled herself asking for discounts, how many times she had gone to bed hungry so there would be enough food for 2. "I just need to cause a scene. Something brief, nothing aggressive, just enough so the date doesn't go forward." Clara reached out and took the envelope. The paper was heavy, warm to the touch. She opened it and saw the perfectly stacked notes. £7,500. The other half would come later. The man nodded and retreated into the shadows. "Good luck," he said, before disappearing down the side alley. Clara stood there for a long minute, looking at the envelope in her hands. What was she about to do? Sabotage a stranger's life for money? But she didn't even know that man. It wasn't as if she was destroying something real. It was just a date, just a dinner. No one would really get hurt. She put the envelope in her bag, took off her apron, and hung it on the wall hook. She took 3 deep breaths, smoothed the simple dress she wore under her uniform, and re-entered the restaurant, this time through the front door. The main dining room was exactly as she had left it. Occupied tables, lively conversations, the soft sound of a piano in the background. Clara walked with firm steps until she located table 17. There he was, Edward Vance. A man in his mid-30s, dark hair neatly combed, an impeccable navy suit, and a serene expression as he fiddled with his phone. In front of him, an empty chair waited for the person with whom he was to have the blind date. Clara felt her stomach churn. There was still time to back out, still time to return the money and pretend none of this had happened. But then she thought of her mother again. She thought of the deadline ending that week. She thought of all the times she had wished for an opportunity, any opportunity, to change things. She approached the table with her heart beating so loudly, she was sure everyone in the restaurant could hear it. Edward looked up from his phone and watched her with curiosity. Clara opened her mouth to say something, anything that would sound convincing. But before she could utter a word, his eyes widened slightly. "Clara?" His voice was soft but carried genuine surprise. She blinked, confused. How did he know her name? She was sure she had never seen this man in her life. But before she could process what was happening, Edward stood up and took a step towards her. "I can't believe you're here." Clara swallowed hard. Her plan, whatever it was, had collapsed before it even began. Should she go through with it? Improvise? Run away? But something in his expression held her in place. There was no anger in that look, only surprise, and perhaps something more, something she couldn't identify. Clara tried to find the words, but they slipped away like water through her fingers. Edward took another step. "You changed your hair. It looks good like that." She felt her face flush. This was completely out of control. He really thought he knew her, but how? From where? Clara looked around, searching for an exit, but the entire restaurant seemed to be watching her. Some people had already turned to see what was happening at table 17. It was at that moment that an elegant woman entered through the main door. She wore a tight red dress and carried a designer bag. Her eyes swept the room until they found Edward. Her expression changed instantly upon seeing Clara standing next to the table. "Edward?" the woman's voice echoed through the restaurant. He turned, clearly confused. The woman approached, her eyes fixed on Clara as if she were an intruder. Clara understood in that instant. This was the person Edward was supposed to have the blind date with. The silence that followed was deafening. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us from which city you are watching us. Let's continue. Clara left the restaurant with trembling legs and the envelope burning inside her bag. She didn't look back. She didn't want to see the expression on the woman in red's face, nor the confused face of Edward Vance. All she wanted was to disappear, to vanish into that city of 12 million people and pretend the last 15 minutes had never happened. She crossed Oxford Street without waiting for the signal, ignoring the irritated honks. Her feet carried her to the nearest underground station, where she mingled with the rush-hour crowd. Inside the packed carriage, pressed between anonymous bodies, Clara finally managed to breathe, or at least try. What had she done? The scene kept replaying in her mind like a film stuck on a loop. The way Edward looked at her, the way he said her name, as if he really knew her. And that woman in red, standing at the restaurant entrance, witnessing everything. Clara clutched her bag to her chest. Inside was the money that would change everything. £7,500 now, plus £7,500 later. Enough to pay the clinic, buy the medicine, maybe even delay the electricity and water bills a little less. But why did it feel so dirty in her hands? When she got home, her mother was already asleep. Clara put the envelope at the bottom of her clothes drawer, took a long shower, and lay in bed, unable to close her eyes. The guilt was a physical weight. On her chest, a stone that grew with each passing minute. The following days passed in a fog. Clara avoided returning to Valor Bistro, claiming food poisoning. She used the money to make the clinic payment and felt a bitter relief seeing the smile on her mother's face when she told her the news. The surgery was scheduled. Finally, there was hope. But the guilt didn't disappear. If anything, it only grew. It was the following Tuesday that everything changed. Clara was at the Paul Frere Community School in North London, preparing the art room for the afternoon workshop. It was her favourite job, the one that made her feel there was still purpose amidst the chaos. The children would arrive in half an hour, and she was arranging brushes, paints, and coloured papers on the low tables. "Auntie Clara!" The high-pitched voice made her look up. A boy of about 6 ran towards her, his brown eyes shining with excitement. It was Lucas, one of the most active children in the class, always with a smile on his face and a new drawing to show. "Hi, Lucas." Clara crouched to his height. "Ready to paint today?" "Always." He opened his arms and hugged her tightly. "I brought my dad to meet you." Clara felt her blood run cold. Slowly, she looked up and saw a man standing at the classroom door. Edward Vance. The same impeccable suit, the same serene face, the same eyes that had looked at her in the restaurant with that inexplicable confusion. The world stopped. Clara stood up slowly, still holding Lucas's hand, unable to form a single word. Edward watched her with an expression she couldn't decipher. There was no anger there, no accusation, just a silent recognition. "Dad, this is Auntie Clara. She's the best art teacher in the world." Edward took a step into the room, his hands in his pockets. "Nice to meet you, Clara. I'm Edward, Lucas's dad." She forced a smile, her throat tight. "Nice to meet you." Her voice came out hoarse. "Are you new here?" "I've never seen you before." "I started 3 months ago." Clara felt her legs go wobbly. "I give illustration workshops twice a week." Lucas tugged his father's hand, excited. "She draws so well, Dad. You have to see her work. One day she'll draw real stories." Edward nodded, still looking at Clara. "I'm sure." He paused. "You know, I have the impression we've met before." Clara's heart pounded. It must be a mistake. Perhaps, but his tone made it clear he didn't believe it. Lucas, happily oblivious to the tension in the air, began to pull his father towards the tables. "Come see what we're going to do today." Edward allowed himself to be guided, but before leaving he cast one last look at Clara. There was something in that look that made her even more uneasy. It wasn't a threat. It was curiosity, as if he was trying to solve a puzzle. When father and son finally left, Clara leaned against the table and let out the breath she had been holding. This couldn't be happening. Of all the schools in London, of all the children, it had to be his son. The irony was too cruel to be a coincidence. During the workshop, Clara tried to concentrate on the children's drawings, but her eyes kept returning to Lucas. He painted with enthusiasm, his tongue sticking out in concentration, completely innocent of the silent storm that had just begun. When the class ended, parents began to arrive to pick up their children. Clara avoided looking at the door, but she knew Edward would be there. And he was. He waved to Lucas, who ran to hug him, and then the two walked towards her. "Thanks for the class, Auntie Clara." Lucas handed her the drawing he had made. "It's for you." Clara took the paper carefully. It was a colourful drawing of a long-haired woman holding brushes, surrounded by smiling children. Her heart ached. "It's beautiful, Lucas. I'll cherish it." Edward watched the scene in silence. Then he looked at Clara. "Thank you for taking such good care of him." She nodded, unable to meet his gaze. "You're welcome." They left, and Clara finally allowed her legs to give way. She sat on one of the small chairs and put her face in her hands. This was a nightmare. How could she continue teaching, knowing that Edward would appear twice a week? How could she look at Lucas, knowing what she had done to his father? But running away was not an option. She needed that job. She needed the money. And more than anything, she couldn't abandon those children. The following weeks were a silent torture. Edward always arrived punctually to pick up Lucas. Sometimes he would watch the class for a few minutes, always polite, always kind. Clara tried to avoid him, but it was impossible. The city that seemed so big had suddenly become too small. And then the casual encounters began. At the corner bakery, where Clara bought bread every morning. At the coffee shop where she stopped for a quick espresso before work. In Hyde Park, where she went for walks on Sundays to clear her mind. Every time they saw each other, Edward greeted her with a nod. Every time Clara felt the weight of guilt grow. He didn't know. He had no idea she had been paid to destroy that blind date. He didn't know it had all been an elaborate lie. Or did he? There were moments when Clara caught herself wondering if the encounters were really coincidences. The way he always appeared in the places she was. The way he looked at her, as if he was waiting for something. A confession, perhaps, or an explanation. It was on a rainy Sunday in June that everything changed again. Clara was in the park, sitting on a covered bench, watching the fine rain fall over the lake. There were few visitors that day, and she was enjoying the solitude, sketching in her notebook. "May I sit?" Edward's voice made her jump. He was standing next to the bench, holding a blue umbrella. Lucas was a few meters behind, chasing pigeons with contagious laughter. Clara quickly closed her notebook. "Of course." Edward sat down, maintaining a respectful distance. They remained silent for a long moment, just watching the rain. "You draw very well," he said finally. "I saw some of your work at the school. Lucas can't stop talking about you. He's a special boy." "He is." Edward smiled, but there was a sadness deep in that smile. "His mother passed away 2 years ago, cancer. Since then I've been trying to be both father and mother." Clara felt the air escape her lungs. Edward's words echoed in the space between them, like a silent lament. She looked at Lucas, who continued running in the light rain, completely oblivious to the weight of that revelation. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, and each syllable carried more than sympathy. It carried guilt, remorse, and a desperate desire to go back in time. Edward nodded, his eyes fixed on his son. "It was hard. It still is. But he's strong. Stronger than me sometimes." He turned to Clara. "And you've made him smile in a way I haven't seen in a long time." Clara's heart tightened. Every word of his was a sharp blade cutting deeper. How could she have done that? How could she have accepted that dirty money? To destroy something in the life of a man who had already lost so much. "I just do my job," she replied, her voice trembling. "No, you do more than that." Edward looked directly at her. "You genuinely care. It shows." Clara looked away, unable to sustain that sincerity. If he knew, if he had the slightest idea of what she had done, he wouldn't be there sitting next to her sharing those words. "Dad." Lucas ran back, drenched and smiling. "Did you see how I got all the pigeons to fly at once?" "I did, champ." Edward opened his arms and the boy jumped into his lap, soaking his expensive suit without the slightest embarrassment. "I think it's time for us to go home before you catch a cold." "But I wanted to stay longer. Another day we'll come back." Edward stood up, balancing his son on his arm. He looked at Clara. "Want a ride?" "It's raining harder now." "No, thank you. I like walking in the rain." He nodded, but Clara noticed he didn't believe her excuse. "To then see you Tuesday at school." "See you Tuesday." She watched them walk away under the blue umbrella, Edward's figure bent to shield his son from the rain. When they disappeared from sight, Clara finally allowed the tears to come. Mixed with the rain, no one would know the difference. The following days were an emotional roller coaster. Clara tried to keep her distance, but it was impossible. Edward started appearing more frequently at the school, always with a reasonable excuse. He wanted to see the projects Lucas was developing. He needed to talk about his progress. He was interested in learning more about the art program. And Clara, despite all the guilt, began to long for those encounters. There was something about Edward that disarmed her. The way he listened when she talked about art, about the impact illustration had on underprivileged children, the way he looked at her, not with the superficial interest of someone just wanting to impress, but with genuine curiosity. It was in July, during the school's art festival, that something definitively changed. Clara had organized an exhibition of the children's work in the covered courtyard. There were drawings, paintings, collages, all created by the little artists throughout the semester. Parents circulated proudly, taking photos and praising their children. Edward arrived with Lucas, but this time he wasn't alone. An elegant woman accompanied him, blonde, wearing an impeccable business suit. She held his arm with familiarity, and Clara felt something strange churn in her stomach. Jealousy. She had no right to feel jealous, not after what she had done. Lucas ran towards her, excited. "Auntie Clara, my drawing is on display." "It is." Clara crouched to hug him, but her eyes remained fixed on Edward and the woman next to him. Edward approached with a smile. "Clara, this is Mariana, my business partner at the company." "Nice to meet you." Mariana extended her hand with a professional smile. "Edward has told me a lot about you." Clara shook her hand, trying to decipher what those words meant. Likewise. Your work with the children is impressive, Mariana continued, observing the exhibited works. Have you ever thought about doing something on a larger scale? Larger scale? A corporate partnership. Vance Technologies has a social responsibility program focused on education. We could take your workshops to more schools. Edward crossed his arms, clearly interested in the proposal. What do you think? Clara blinked, processing. Was this real? An opportunity to expand her work, to reach more children, but coming from him, from the man she had harmed? I don't know. It's a lot of responsibility. Think carefully. Edward lightly touched her arm and Clara felt an electric current run through her skin. I believe in your work. That touch, however brief, changed something. Clara realized at that moment that feelings were growing there, feelings she shouldn't have. Feelings built on a rotten foundation of lies. During the following weeks, Clara and Edward began to meet, to discuss the possible partnership. Always in public places, always professional, but there was a tension in the air that neither of them could ignore. Conversations about social projects turned into conversations about life, about dreams, about fears. Edward told her how he built the company from scratch, about the sleepless nights, about the constant fear of failure. Clara shared her own struggles, her mother's illness, her multiple jobs, the dream of one day illustrating children's books. There was a connection there, something genuine and profound. And that made everything worse, because Clara knew she was being a fraud. She knew that every shared moment was contaminated by the initial lie. It was on an August night, after a meeting at Vance Technologies' office, that everything almost fell apart. Clara was waiting for the elevator when she heard voices coming from a nearby room. The door was ajar. I still don't understand why you're so interested in this art teacher. It was Mariana's voice. Because she's talented. Because I believe in her work. Edward's voice sounded defensive. Or because she looks like someone from your past. Clara froze. What are you talking about? That blind date that was sabotaged, remember? A woman appeared pretending to be your ex. Mariana paused. She looked a lot like Clara. The silence that followed was deafening. Clara felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. He knew, or at least suspected. And if Mariana had made the connection, how long until Edward did too? That was months ago, Edward replied finally. And it has nothing to do with Clara. Are you sure? Because I saw the video that circulated on social media at the time. And the resemblance is striking. Clara didn't wait to hear more. She stepped into the elevator that had just arrived and pressed the ground floor button with trembling hands. When the doors closed, she leaned against the cold metal wall and tried to control her breathing. There was a video. People had filmed it. What if Edward decided to investigate? What if he compared the images? Everything would collapse. The trust they had built, the friendship, the feelings that were beginning to blossom, everything would be destroyed. When she got home that night, Clara found an unmarked envelope in the mailbox. Inside, a single printed photo. It was her at Valor Bistro, at the exact moment she approached Edward's table. And on the back of the photo, a handwritten message in irregular letters. If you stay close to him, everyone will know what you did. Clara let the envelope fall to the floor. Her legs gave way, and she slid down the wall until she sat in the cold hallway of the building. Tears came without warning, silent and bitter. Someone knew. Someone was watching her, and that someone was willing to use that information to destroy her, or worse, to destroy Edward. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us from which city you are watching us. Let's continue. Clara spent the night awake, the threatening photo on her bedside table, a constant reminder of the mistake she had made. Every sound in the building made her jump. Every car light passing by on the street kept her alert. Who had sent it? The man who hired her? Someone who worked for him? Or was there more people involved than she imagined? When the sun finally rose, Clara had made a decision. She couldn't just accept that threat. She couldn't let a stranger control her life. If there was something bigger behind that night at the restaurant, she needed to find out what. And more importantly, she needed to protect Edward and Lucas from any harm her action might have caused. She called the school and asked for a week's sick leave. Then she put on simple clothes, tied her hair in a ponytail, and took the underground towards Mayfair. where the Valor Bistro was located. The restaurant was closed in the morning, but Clara knew the cleaning staff arrived early. She waited in a cafe across the street until she saw the back door open. She immediately recognized the slender figure of Roderick, one of the oldest waiters who had always been friendly with her. Clara crossed the street and called him. Roderick turned, surprised. "Clara? I thought you didn't work here anymore." "I don't, but I need a favor." She looked around to make sure no one else was listening. "Do you remember that night there was a commotion at table 17? That interrupted date." Roderick frowned. "I remember. It was strange. The lady appeared out of nowhere, and the guy was completely confused. There was even a video online." "Yes." Clara took a deep breath. "I need to see the security camera footage from that night, especially from the back entrance." "What for?" "It's complicated, but it's important. Very important." Roderick crossed his arms, hesitant. "Clara, you know I could lose my job if I let someone access those recordings." "I know, and I wouldn't ask if it wasn't urgent." She touched his arm. "Please, Roderick. It's a matter of safety." He sighed, looked around, and motioned for her to follow him. 5 minutes. "I can't give you more than that." They entered through the back door and went down to the basement, where the small security room was located. Roderick unlocked the door and turned on the old computer that stored the recordings. "Which date?" "April 12th. He typed the date and the images began to appear on the screen. Clara saw herself walking out the back door, lighting an imaginary cigarette, and then the figure of the man in the suit approaching. Her heart raced. "Stop there," she requested. Roderick paused the image. Clara looked closely at the man's face. Even in the low-quality recording, his features were clearly visible. Graying hair, square jaw, a small scar on his left eyebrow. "Do you know this man?" Roderick asked. "No, but I need to find out who he is." Roderick zoomed in on the image. "Wait a minute. I think I've seen this guy before." "Where?" "He came here a few times. Always alone, always asking for a corner table. But it wasn't recently. It was about 2 years ago, maybe." "Do you remember the name?" Roderick shook his head. "Sorry, I serve dozens of people every night." Clara photographed the screen with her phone. At least now she had a face. A starting point. "Thank you, Roderick, seriously. You have no idea how much this helps. Just be careful. Clara, this kind of thing can be dangerous." She nodded and left the restaurant with the image burning in her memory. Back at the cafe across the street, Clara opened the laptop she had brought and started working. If there was one thing her years doing freelance design work had taught her, it was how to use the internet to find information. She used a reverse image search program, but got no results. Then she tried a different approach. She searched for consulting firms that had competed for contracts with Vance Technologies in recent years. There were several, but one caught her attention. Silver & Associates, a boutique consulting firm specializing in corporate technology that had lost a large government contract to Edwards Company 6 months. Before the sabotage date, Clara clicked on the company's website and navigated to the team section. Her heart almost stopped when she saw the photo. There he was. Frederick Silver, senior partner, the same man who had approached her behind the restaurant. She had found him. But now came the hard part. What to do with that information? Confront him? Go to the police? Tell Edward? Each option seemed worse than the last. If she went to the authorities, she would have to admit her own role in the sabotage. If she told Edward, he would know the truth about who she really was. Clara closed the laptop and put her face in her hands. She was so lost, so torn between fear and the need to do the right thing. It was then that her phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. Clara opened it with trembling hands. "Stop looking. This is bigger than you think. Stay away from Vance or everyone will know you were paid to destroy him." The threat was clear, but instead of feeling fear, Clara felt anger. Anger at being used, anger at being threatened, anger at herself for having accepted that money in the first place. She typed a quick reply. "Who are you? What do you want from me?" The answer came almost instantly. "We just want Vance to understand there are consequences for his business choices. You were a piece. Don't be a martyr." Clara read those words several times. So it wasn't about her. It never had been. She was just a tool, a means to a greater end. Someone wanted to harm Edward, his company, his reputation. And she had helped unknowingly. She needed to warn him. Regardless of the consequences for herself, Edward had the right to know he was being targeted by an orchestrated campaign against him. Clara grabbed her things and left the cafe. She knew the address of Vance Technologies. She had been there before for meetings about the social project. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Edward would probably be in the office. The building was imposing, all glass and steel, in the heart of Canary Wharf. Clara entered the lobby and approached the reception desk. "I need to speak with Mr. Edward Vance. It's urgent." The receptionist looked at her with polite suspicion. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but he knows me. I'm Clara Bennett, from the art workshops." The woman typed something into the computer and made an internal call. After a few minutes, she nodded. "He said you can go up. 15th floor." Clara entered the elevator with her heart in her throat. The mirrored walls reflected a version of her that seemed small, frightened. But she had to do it. She had to tell the truth, no matter the cost. When the doors opened on the 15th floor, Edward was waiting in the hallway. He had his sleeves rolled up and a worried expression. "Clara, did something happen?" "Is Lucas okay?" "Lucas is fine." Clara took a deep breath. "But I need to talk to you. It's about something that happened a few months ago. Something that involves you and your company." Edward led her into an empty meeting room and closed the door. "Sit down. What's going on?" Clara looked at her hands. There was no turning back. It was time to tell the truth, however painful it might be. "Edward, do you remember that blind date that was interrupted? At Valor Bistro?" He stiffened in his chair. "I remember. I was paid to do that." The silence that settled in the meeting room was so dense that Clara could hear her own heart beating. Edward stared at her unblinkingly, his face completely expressionless. She didn't know if that was better or worse than an angry outburst. "Continue," he said finally, his voice low and controlled. Clara swallowed hard and continued. "A man approached me behind the restaurant. He offered £15,000 to sabotage your date. I was desperate. My mother needed surgery and I didn't have the money." She felt tears threaten to come but forced herself to continue. "I thought it would be quick, without consequences, that I would never see you again. But then Lucas came into my workshop and you appeared and you didn't say anything." Edward's voice had a coldness she had never heard before. "I wanted to. 1,000 times I wanted to. But the longer time passed, the more impossible it became. And then I started receiving threats." Edward got up from his chair, turning his back to her as he looked out the glass window overlooking Canary Wharf. "What kind of threats?" "Photos. Messages saying they'll expose everything if I stay close to you." Clara took her phone out of her bag and showed him the messages. "I investigated on my own. The man who hired me is named Frederick Silver. He's a partner in a consulting firm that lost a big contract to your company." Edward turned sharply. "Silver and Associates?" "Yes." He ran a hand through his hair, processing the information. "So this was corporate sabotage from the start." "It seems so." Clara stood up too. "Edward, I know there's no excuse for what I did. I know I betrayed your trust before I even truly knew you. But you need to know that everything that happened afterward, everything I felt, was real. I didn't plan to fall in love with you." The words came out before she could stop them. Edward froze, his eyes widening slightly. The silence returned even heavier than before. "You're falling in love with me," he repeated as if testing the words. "Yes." Clara felt the tears finally escape. "And I know I have no right. I know I should have told you from day one. But Edward raised his hand, interrupting her. He walked back to the chair and sat down heavily, his head bowed. Clara waited each second, feeling like an eternity. "I knew," he said finally. "What?" "I knew you were the woman from the restaurant. From the day I saw you at school." His voice was tired. "For months I had been suspecting. The coincidences were too many. The way you avoided my gaze, how you tensed up whenever I came close. Then why didn't you say anything?" Clara felt her legs go wobbly. "Because I wanted to believe there was an explanation, that you had your reasons. And because," he looked up at her, "because Lucas has never been as happy as when you came into his life. And neither have I." Clara slumped into the chair, shock taking over. He knew. All this time he knew and still chose to stay close to her, to get to know her, to trust her. But now that you've confirmed it, Edward continued, I need time to process all this. To understand what's real and what was built on lies. I understand. He stood up and walked to the door. I'll investigate Silver. If he's threatening you, he's threatening my company too. But Clara, he paused, for now I think it's best if you don't come to the school anymore. Not until I can think clearly. The words were like a punch to the stomach, but Clara nodded. Okay. She picked up her bag with trembling hands. Edward, just one more thing. About the money. I've already returned every penny. I used savings, sold some things, but it's all back in the account it was originally transferred from. Edward looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Take care, Clara. She left the room with heavy legs and a broken heart. In the elevator, she allowed the tears to fall freely. She had done the right thing by telling the truth, but the cost had been too high. The following days were the darkest Clara had lived in a long time. She avoided the phone, avoided social media, avoided everything that could remind her of Edward and Lucas, her mother. Noticing her daughter's state, tried to talk, but Clara had no words to explain. It was the following Friday that everything changed again. Clara was at home making tea when the doorbell rang. She opened the door and found Mariana, Edward's partner, standing in the hallway. We need to talk, Mariana said without preamble. Clara let her in, confused. Mariana sat in the small living room and went straight to the point. Edward told me everything. About you, about Silver, about the threats. She crossed her legs. And I found out some things you need to know. What? Frederick Silver isn't acting alone. There's a group of businessmen who lost contracts to Vance Technologies. In the last 2 years, they formed a kind of informal alliance to harm Edward's reputation. Mariana opened a folder and showed her documents. They hired private investigators, hackers, even journalists to plant negative stories in the media. Clara looked at the documents, her stomach churning. So I was just part of a bigger plan. Exactly. And the worst part is they won't stop. Now that they know you told Edward the truth, they'll try to use it against him in another way. They'll leak the story to the press, distort the facts, make it seem like he's the villain. What can I do? Testify. Mariana looked at her seriously. If you formally testify about how you were coerced, about the threats you received, we can use that to prosecute Silver and the others. It won't be easy. You'll have to expose your own mistake, but it's the only way to stop them from continuing. Clara thought of Edward, of Lucas, of everything they represented. She thought of the child she had hugged with such affection, of the man who had looked at her as if she mattered. She couldn't let them be destroyed because of her mistake. I'll do it, she said, whatever it takes. Mariana nodded and put away the documents. There's one more thing. Edward wants to see you. Not about this, about something else. He's at his apartment now with Lucas. She held out a piece of paper with an address. If you want to, of course. Clara took the paper with trembling hands. After Mariana left, she stood in the middle of the room looking at the address. Part of her wanted to run there immediately. Another part was afraid of what she would find. But she had already made the decision to be brave. She had already chosen the truth, no matter the cost. Clara took a shower, put on simple clothes, and took the bus to the neighborhood where Edward lived. The building was elegant, but not ostentatious, with a friendly doorman who let her up after confirming with the apartment. When the door opened, it was Lucas who appeared. His eyes lit up immediately. Auntie Clara, you came. He hugged her tightly, and Clara felt her heart ache. How she had missed that boy. Edward appeared behind him, his hands in the pockets of his jeans. Hi, he said simply. Hi. Lucas pulled her hand. Come see my room. I have new drawings to show you. She looked at Edward, who nodded. Go, I'll wait. Clara allowed herself to be dragged down the hall to a colorful room full of toys and drawings on the walls. Lucas showed each illustration with enthusiasm, talking non-stop about the stories behind each one. Clara listened to everything with genuine attention, laughing at the right moments, asking questions, letting the boy's joy heal some of the pain in her chest. After half an hour, Edward appeared at the door. Lucas, how about you go play video games in the living room? I need to talk to Clara. Okay. Lucas hugged Clara one more time before running off. Edward entered the room and closed the door partially. He leaned against the desk, maintaining a safe distance. Thanks for coming. Thanks for calling me. He took a deep breath. I've spent the last few days thinking a lot. About you, about us, about everything that happened. Clara waited, her heart beating so hard she was sure Edward could hear it. He remained leaning against the desk, his fingers lightly tapping the wood, as if organizing his thoughts before speaking. The truth is, I'm hurt, he said finally. I won't lie about that. When you confirmed what I already suspected, it was like something inside me broke. But at the same time, he paused, at the same time I understand why you did it. Clara felt her eyes sting. There's no justification for what I did. There's context, Edward gently corrected her. You were desperate. You needed to take care of your mother. I'm not saying it was right, but I understand the desperation. He crossed his arms. I lost my wife 2 years ago. In the end, the medical bills left me almost bankrupt. I sold my apartment, I sold my car, I mortgaged the company. I would have done anything to save her. So yes, I understand. Tears finally escaped Clara's eyes. I'm sorry for everything. For accepting that money, for not telling you sooner, for putting you and Lucas at risk. Edward slowly approached and, to her surprise, wiped a tear from Clara's face with his thumb. But you know what else I thought about these days? That you could have kept lying. You could have hidden everything forever. But you chose to come to me and tell the truth, even knowing the consequences. That means something. It means I couldn't live with the lie anymore. And that tells me more about who you are than that night at the restaurant. Edward let his hand drop. Clara, I don't know if I can forget what happened. Maybe I'll never forget. But I'm willing to try to rebuild something new, something honest, even after everything. I am so especially after everything, because now there are no more secrets between us. He gave a small, sad smile. And because Lucas asks about you every day. And because I miss you too. Clara let out a sob mixed with a laugh. I miss you both too. A lot. Then let's try again. No lies this time. Edward extended his hand. Starting from scratch. Hi, I'm Edward Vance. I'm a widower, father to an amazing boy, and CEO of a tech company that apparently has many enemies. Clara took his hand, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers. Hi, I'm Clara Bennett. I teach art to children, care for my sick mother, and made a terrible mistake that I'm trying to fix. Nice to meet you. Clara, the pleasure is mine, Edward. They stood there, holding hands for a long moment. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There was no music playing or fireworks. It was just two broken people trying to find their way back to each other. Lucas appeared at the door, interrupting the moment. Are you done talking? Is Auntie Clara having dinner with us? Edward looked at Clara with a raised eyebrow. Are you? She smiled, a genuine smile this time. I'd love to. Dinner was simple. Pizza delivery and soda, eaten at the coffee table in the living room, while Lucas told stories about school and showed his new drawings. It was ordinary, even mundane. But for Clara, who had spent weeks carrying the weight of guilt, that normality was a gift. When Lucas finally went to sleep, Edward and Clara remained on the sofa, a respectful space between them. Mariana told me about the testimony, Edward said. Thank you for agreeing to do it. It's the least I can do. It's going to be difficult. The media will want to sensationalize it. They'll distort everything. I know, Clara looked at her hands. But if it helps protect you and Lucas, it's worth it. Edward nodded, thoughtful. I'm hiring a public relations firm to control the damage. And my legal team is already preparing the lawsuit against Silver and the others. How long will it take? Months, probably. Maybe years. But we'll win. He looked at her. And when all this is over, when the chaos passes, I'd like to take you out to dinner. A real dinner, not a sabotage date. Clara laughed, the sound light and liberating. I'd love that. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Clara formally testified to the authorities, recounting every detail of that night and the threats she received afterward. The story leaked to the press as Edward had predicted. The tabloids had a field day with sensational headlines. Vance Technologies CEO victim of romantic sabotage. Teacher confesses to being paid to destroy blind date. It was brutal. Clara had to endure stares on the street, malicious comments on social media, messages from strangers judging her choices. But Edward was there, offering support even from afar, and Lucas, blessedly oblivious to the adult drama, continued drawing and smiling as always. The turning point came 2 months later. An investigation revealed that Frederick Silver and his associates had done much more than hire Clara. They had bribed public officials, manipulated bids, and even hacked into Vance Technologies systems to steal confidential information. The case exploded in the media, but this time with a different angle. Edward was no longer the victim of romantic sabotage. He was the victim of a criminal corporate conspiracy. Silver was arrested. Other executives involved were too. And slowly, the media's attention shifted away from Clara and back to where it should be, on the real crimes that had been committed. It was on a rainy October afternoon, 6 months after that first confession in the meeting room, that Edward finally took Clara to that promised dinner. Not at Valor Bistro, never there again, but at a small cozy restaurant in Chinatown, full of colorful lanterns and the smell of oriental spices. They talked about everything and nothing, about the social projects that were finally getting off the ground, bringing Clara's art workshops to 10 different schools, about how Lucas was growing too fast and already talked about being an artist when he grew up, about Clara's mother, who had recovered well from the surgery and now helped her daughter prepare materials for classes. "You're different," Edward observed, taking a sip of wine. "Lighter. I feel different," Clara smiled. "It's strange to say this after everything that happened, but I think I needed it. I needed to face my mistake, to accept the consequences. Only then could I truly move forward. I've changed too." Edward took her hand across the table, a gesture that had become natural in recent weeks. "I learned that not everything is black and white, that people are complicated and make mistakes, and that it's worth giving second chances. Even when the first chance started with a lie, especially when the truth comes later." He squeezed her hand. "Clara, I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if this will work out, but I know I want to try. I want to too." They finished dinner with a shared dessert and genuine laughter. When Edward dropped her off at home, he kissed her at the building door. It was a soft, careful kiss, full of unspoken promises. "Good night, Clara." "Good night, Edward." She went up to her apartment with butterflies in her stomach and a silly smile on her face. Her mother was awake, waiting, with that look of someone who knew exactly what had happened. "Is he the one? The person who made you smile again?" Clara nodded. "He is, Mom. And he knows everything." "He knows. And he's still here." Her mother hugged her daughter tightly. "Then he's a good man. Hold on tight, but not so tight that you suffocate. Let it grow naturally." Clara hugged her mother back, grateful for that simple wisdom. "I'll try." The months that followed were not perfect. There were moments of tension, discussions about boundaries and trust, days when the past came back to haunt them, but they always found a way back to each other. They always chose to talk. They always chose the truth. Lucas was the thread that kept them connected. His innocent joy, his ability to forgive and move on without holding grudges, served as an example for the adults around him. He called Clara Auntie, but in his eyes she was already much more than that. It was in December at the school's end-of-year party that Clara realized how much her life had changed. She was on the makeshift stage in the courtyard, helping the children present their final works. Parents watched proudly from the rows of chairs. And there, in the third row, Edward held his phone to film Lucas showing an abstract painting he had created. When their eyes met, Edward smiled. It wasn't the polite smile of their first encounter. It wasn't the confused smile of the day of the sabotage. It was the smile of someone who had chosen to stay, despite everything. Clara smiled back and turned her attention to the children. That was her life now, imperfect, complicated, but honest. She had started with a lie, but she was building something true on the rubble of that mistake. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope Clara and Edward's story has touched your hearts. Sometimes the mistakes we make don't define who we are, but rather how we choose to deal with them. To continue this emotional journey, we have prepared a special playlist with equally engaging stories that explore the complexity of human relationships, forgiveness, and new beginnings. You can find it by clicking here. If this narrative resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like on the video. Every day we bring unique stories that celebrate the imperfection of life and the courage to start anew. We want to know what you thought of this story in the comments. Could you forgive like Edward? Would you have Clara's courage to own up to such a big mistake? Share your reflections with us. Until the next story.